Usually, the media's bias and refusal to look for the whole truth show up in coverage of big events. But sometimes it's even more blatant. Sometimes people in big media make statements about the industry, and in their own remarks, they show you how they think. They show you that they totally tune out what they don't want to see, and that they go for two-dimensional storylines that fit their own worldviews. They also tell you that that is the whole story. This has been happening in recent days as journalists discuss what is a big story: mass layoffs at the Washington Post, one of the nation's biggest newspapers. Big media have been willing to acknowledge only a piece of what happened and why the paper is struggling. They're literally not mentioning the Post's journalistic failures, not one word. Even so-called media critics refuse to criticize the Post. Coming up, I'll tell you what people inside the Post have been telling me behind the scenes. This moment serves as a window into how the media operates. It's this industry that controls how millions of people view the world. And when we get an opportunity to see how the folks doing that think, we should take it. In their view, there are good guys and bad guys, and once the parties are cast in those roles, there shall be no bad words spoken of the good guys, and everything shall be blamed on the bad guys. Meanwhile, what's actually happening in the media is what's happening in the country. I'll explain coming up. You might be surprised what fits into this story. The Washington Post is struggling, while the New York Times is boasting an increase in its audience, even as the Times doubles down on its own journalistic failures. It had another huge one the other day that I'll tell you about, involving a mass slaughter in Africa. It speaks to the same problem. The media hides what it does not want to acknowledge, plays up points that fit its agenda, and insists that that is truth. In the process, the media is radicalizing a slice of America. Also today, how coverage of Bad Bunny's halftime show at the Super Bowl reflects the same problem. And a listener asks me whether Trump is really trying to nationalize elections. Coming up on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. So great to have you here in the fight for truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. My name is Josh Lebs, and this is They Stand Corrected, which fact checks the news. You can learn all about me at my website, joshlebs.com. I spent 20 years in mainstream media, including 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN, where I was basically the lead on-air fact checker. But I saw then and see now how badly the media needs to be fact checked. There is so much tossed at you in today's legacy media environment that is not true. Wow, this is the 94th episode. I launched this entirely myself. I knew I had to do it that way because in fact-checking, an independent voice was necessary. At the top of the show, I always like to thank people who are making it possible. One way to do that is through ratings and reviews on the podcast platforms. This is the latest on Apple Podcasts, also 5 stars. This person wrote that this show helps make sure we don't get swayed by media biases. As our society continues to be divided politically, economically, and socially, it's refreshing to have someone hold both sides accountable for the truth. Thank you so much to that person. Some people prefer anonymity, which is fine in cases like this. Another way to support this show is to become a paid subscriber to the newsletter. I designed the newsletter to accompany this show. I don't expect you to take my word for anything, and I have lots of links and other information for you in writing that you can check out yourself. You'll find links in the show notes. It's on a platform called Substack, and it's just theystandcorrected.substack.com. It is free, but paid subscribers are essential to supporting this show, and I give them additional content like edited, hyperlinked transcripts, and more. One of the perks is that they can send comments, feedback, and questions. They are the first people I turn to when deciding what to cover on this show. A new paid subscriber, Susan, wrote me this. I subscribed as soon as I heard the episode. Thank you. I have a quick question because I know the media, she says, is filled with activists and rewrites stories or presents what they want. She asks, is Trump seriously trying to nationalize elections, or is that a media lie? I just want facts, she says, and I'm tired of the lies and scare tactics. But I also am fearful that some is maybe true. Well, thank you, Susan. And here is what she's talking about. Trump was on the podcast of Dan Bongino, who had served as his deputy FBI director. Trump said this.
The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. And we have states that are so crooked, and they're counting votes. We have states that I won that show I didn't win.
On this show, I focus on big mainstream media because no one's fact-checking them, and they're so powerful. They jumped on this story. Here, for example, is CBS.
President Trump is doubling down on calls for Republicans to nationalize elections. Yesterday in the Oval Office, the president called out multiple states for what he described as crooked elections and repeated debunked claims that the 2020 election was rigged.
Okay, first a note about that. CBS said accurately there that Trump repeats debunked claims about the 2020 election being rigged. In a previous episode, I told you that all these big media have been trying to attack CBS lately because of its new leadership. They keep telling you the sky is falling at CBS and it's turning into some right-wing network. Well, if that were the case, they wouldn't be doing reports like this. So those other media losing their minds about CBS keep being proven wrong. But back to this point, this whole idea of nationalizing elections. I looked through a bunch of coverage and was struck by how few reports tell you super important basic facts. Like this. The U.S. Constitution says this about how elections work. Quote, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be described in each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. That has long been recognized to mean that states have primary control over elections. Congress can come along to alter what states have done. That ability has been used to achieve some good things, most importantly, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. At the time, a bunch of states, particularly in the South, had laws designed to prevent Black people from voting without specifically saying that that's what they were doing. The Voting Rights Act let the federal government get involved and say no. The federal government was also able to argue that it had the power to get involved because of two amendments. There's the 14th Amendment establishing equal protection of the laws, and the 15th Amendment, which specifically says the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So, the federal government, through the legislative branch, the Congress, could overrule states on certain election rules. Now, since I'm into giving you the whole truth on anything I talk about, I will point this out. Part of the Voting Rights Act was voided more than 10 years ago. The conservative justices on the Supreme Court agreed that southern states should no longer have to seek federal approval when changing their laws, since the mechanism that was set up for that was old, dating back to the 1960s. They argued that it should no longer apply. Anyway, the big picture here, throughout U.S. history, states have had primary control over elections. The idea of nationalizing elections, having the federal government just take over, would clearly go against the power of states enshrined in the Constitution. The executive branch, which the president controls, definitely can't do anything to overtake elections. Congress could pass laws, but nationalizing, as in taking them over, goes way beyond just altering states' individual laws. And the idea of Trump doing anything to change elections is frightening and concerning. Everyone should stand against that. Trump keeps pushing disproven lies about elections. His own team in 2020 knew he lost for real. So, in short, Trump cannot simply nationalize elections. There's also no sign that Congress would try to do this or would be able to if it did try. This is a reminder, by the way, of why midterm elections matter. All elections matter. Midterms, too. If people want to make sure Congress would not even try something like this, then people should vote for lawmakers who won't try something like this. In general, fewer than half of eligible voters show up for midterm elections. I read so many news stories about this, and no one was making this stuff clear. Keep those questions coming. Now, let's dig into this.
This is an extremely grim outcome at the Washington Post, a dark day, as many people have been saying.
That is a clip from the New York Times, a podcast called The Daily. The man speaking there is Eric Wemple. He was part of the Washington Post until he took a buyout last year and joined the New York Times. Back at the Post, his title was media critic.
We knew the layoffs were coming, but they hit, and they hit with a tremendous amount of force. And that analysis doesn't need to extend that much further than just saying that 300 people who practice journalism for the benefit of American civic life have lost their jobs, maybe lost their careers, and their livelihood, at least for some time.
So, the guy who was the Washington Post's own media critic is pretending that all 300 people who have been let go were practicing journalism for the benefit of American life. That is a factually false statement. Everyone who is willing to look at reality knows it. I want to be clear here. You can have friends who lost their jobs and feel for them and recognize how difficult it is without engaging in this. The word that keeps coming to mind is hagiography, which is probably too fancy a word. Just like pretending that everyone is a saint. This is what so many people like Eric Wemple have been doing. There are all these pieces going around from journalists saying stuff like this, that literally everyone who was let go at the Post is such a phenomenal journalist, and that's all there is to it. There are multiple issues here, and in order to understand what's going on in our media and in this story, we need to pull them apart. First, the Washington Post is no paragon of journalism. 300 people who were let go include a bunch of propagandists who infiltrated the business to push their agendas. This is not an opinion. They do this openly. I've reported on how people running the paper's coverage of the Middle East are former employees of the Qatari government. They were leaders at its state-owned propaganda giant known around the world as Al Jazeera. The Post has probably been the most biased newspaper, maybe even the most biased news agency in the United States in its coverage of anything involving Israel. Here's a clip from just one episode. Hezbollah had launched yet another rocket attack. This rocket hit a soccer field, killing 12 Israeli Druze children. I shared with you what the actress and activist Deborah Messing pointed out on Instagram.
And how did the Washington Post report this terror attack on northern Israel? Alongside a photo of the grieving Druze families? Israel hits Lebanon. What? The international media perverted and twisted the story. BBC, AP, Sky News, all of them spread propaganda directly from the Islamic Republic in Iran and showed abhorrent disrespect for the children and their mourning families. This is unconscionable. These poor families are grieving, and then the international media erases their reality? What happened to honest journalism?
What she referred to there was the Washington Post's front page, the big headline. There was this photo of grieving Israeli families, but you would only know that if you looked at the tiny caption. The people at the Post know how this works. Most people who see a paper only see the image of the front page. They see the headline and a picture. The Post ended up putting a little note inside the next day's paper saying that their headline and subheadline did not provide adequate context. But the damage was done, and they've done this before. They had a wildly wrong front page attack piece against Israel based on lies that they had not even tried to fact check. In another episode, I explained that the Post was ignoring its own previous reporting in order to whitewash the Munich Olympics terrorist attacks. The journalistic fiascos extend to other topics as well. I did an episode about how the media, including the Washington Post, endangered the lives of pregnant women by getting a story wildly wrong about what the Trump administration was doing involving emergency care at hospitals. Emergency room physician Dr. Dara Cass joined me in that episode to talk about what it meant for women who might drive out of state when they're having an emergency, the danger that they could die along the way. The Washington Post kept its false headline up. The Post does stuff like that all the time. But you would have no idea from what these folks in other big media are saying. Now, the layoffs. They include the international desk, which means most or all of the pro-Islamist terror people who have been overseeing international coverage. They're gone. That's a good thing. So are some other biased people who have been using the Post for their own personal agendas. People inside the Post who are genuinely committed to truth tell me that it's a baby bathwater scenario. Lots of anti-journalistic people were let go, but so were good, solid journalists. There's no sign that the Post leadership made any decisions here based on who is telling the truth or who is a bad journalist. They got rid of sections, including sports. Now comes the why. The Post said it has basically been bleeding money, losing millions and millions of dollars. Why is that? Well, if you listen to people in big media, then journalistic failures played no role here. It's exclusively a matter of the Post's leadership trying to appease Trump. The paper's decisions in that respect are definitely part of the problem, but that is definitely not the whole story. There are other reasons people have been flocking away from the Washington Post. It speaks to what America's looking for, how America is changing, and what the news industry refuses to do. A big milestone is coming up as this show completes its second full year. We will reach the 100th episode. It is time-consuming and expensive to get you the truth. I'm up against bazillion-dollar corporate media that spread lies, but I'm so glad I'm doing it. In honor of the birthday, you can become a founding member of They Stand Corrected for a discounted rate right now. In return, you'll get all the benefits of membership, including unlimited access to the best fact-checking content there is, and the keys to accessing big legacy media for free, so you can save money. It's a win-win. Most importantly, you can help make this show possible. Every episode is designed to help us all build new synapses in our minds that guide us to truth and away from the media lies that manipulate us. Is your brain worth $1 a week, maybe? Celebrate with me. Then you can spend the next year knowing that They Stand Corrected reaches you and the world with your help. Check out the link in the show notes or my website, joshlevs.com, and you'll see what to do. It takes less than a minute, but the results last a whole year. Thank you. In late 2024, the Washington Post's owner, Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, pulled the editorial board's planned endorsement of Kamala Harris. He prevented it from running. I explained at the time that that was a terrible move. If you want to cancel all endorsements in general, do that, but not days before an election when one of the candidates, Trump in that case, was threatening to use his power to come after your business. That obviously sends a message of kowtowing. News organizations need backers, including their owners, to stand by them and not cave to politicians' threats. They shouldn't even signal any suggestion of doing so. After that, a lot of people canceled their subscriptions to the Post. There were reports that it was even more than 200,000 people. In recent days, after the Post laid off more than a third of its staff, big media has been telling you that the paper's moves to placate Trump have been the entire exclusive reason for the paper's downfall. One guy all over the news is Marty Baron, a former executive editor of the Post. Here he was on the BBC talking about Bezos.
And his activities subsequent to that definitely alienated subscribers. The fact that he appeared during the inauguration on the stage with Donald Trump, the fact that Amazon bought for an exorbitant price the documentary of Melania Trump, the fact that it acquired the rights to the Apprentice television series in which Donald Trump starred, and that he receives a substantial portion of that money.
There's some stuff to break down in that. In the big picture, Bezos has absolutely been making overtures to Trump to warm up that relationship. Hey, it's how America voted. However, Anything the media tells you should be true, which means facts plus context. So there's some stuff to correct in what he said there. Of course, the BBC did not. Let's start with this. Amazon did throw money at this Melania documentary thing. Who knows how big the competition was for it behind the scenes or how many viewers it will get. Meanwhile, when this guy said that Bezos appeared at the inauguration on the stage with Trump, I was like, what? Did he? No, there was this collection of billionaires who were seated very prominently at the inauguration. Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, of course, Bezos, and Microsoft's CEO Sundar Pichai. They were seated on this dais, but they weren't up on the stage with Trump at the inauguration. That would have been super weird. The fact that they were placed there is judgeable and does fuel legitimate concerns about oligarchy in America, billionaires having crazy amounts of power. Still, it's not the same as being up on the stage with Trump at the inauguration. As for The Apprentice, Amazon bought MGM. So Amazon owns tons of things, including The Apprentice, which, yes, they are streaming now. So these moves surely did turn away subscribers who are very much not fans of Trump. In this BBC interview, Marty Baron kept going. Here's more of what he said about the Post.
And then the decision to totally remake the opinion pages. And they essentially excluded all columnists who were to the left of center, even slightly to the left of center. And they remade the editorials as well to sort of push this sort of libertarian ideology that corresponds to Jeff Bezos' own ideology. But they softened all the criticism of Donald Trump.
Again, not so simple. The Post absolutely changed its opinion section and did announce that it was basically going to go in this free markets libertarian direction. But Marty Baron said they excluded all columnists left of center. He or the BBC could literally have just looked at the Post. Here's what they would have seen. Headline: Trump's immunity reflects a malignant legacy. That is by human rights lawyer Eric L. Lewis, a column slamming the Trump administration. They just ran a letter from Senator Edward Markey, who identifies as progressive. It is true that a few columnists who identify as liberal took buyouts that were available to lots of people. But there are still columnists who very much criticize Trump. Here is a new headline from columnist Max Boot. Quote, Trump has a strong man's contempt for international law. Of course, I have reported on the fact that people in the media don't know what international law is, but that's beside the point for now. The image you get from Marty Baron, who has been all over the news, not just on the BBC, is two-dimensional and in some ways inaccurate. But the bigger point, yes, the Post moved in a direction far more accepting of Trump and that political movement. They definitely turned off a lot of subscribers that way. But that is not the whole story. Maybe some people have canceled their subscriptions for other reasons. Is it possible to find someone? Took me 1 minute.
Even the most professional news organizations have extreme biases. Serious reporters can write compelling articles backed up with numbers that fit their worldview that actually don't hold up at all.
This is Rachel Lester, a graduate of USC, the University of Southern California. She spent time serving in the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. There are things she knows and has seen firsthand. She ran this video on Instagram pointing out big failures in Washington Post coverage, just wildly wrong, nonsensical numbers and claims they were running. When she put up this post, she said she was still keeping her Washington Post paid subscription. Then later on, when the Post managed to get even worse, she canceled and wrote a column about that. We don't know all the reasons that people have been canceling. I canceled long ago due to the Washington Post's failures. I tell listeners all the time that they should cancel subscriptions to failing legacy media. You should. As long as those organizations fail to do the job of giving you the whole truth, they don't deserve your hard-earned money. They're not fighting for you. And one of the perks to the paid subscribers on my newsletter is that I show them how to access news from the major media, including the big papers, for free legally, not cheating anything. Anyway, when the media have been reporting about problems at the Post in recent days, They literally don't mention the possibility that any journalistic failures may have driven anyone in the audience away. That brings us to the New York Times. News agencies keep pointing out that the Times has been increasing its readership. Here's the BBC.
If you look at the New York Times, they added 450,000 digital subscribers just in the fourth quarter, 1.4 million last year. So there is a way to do it.
The Times has had growth on its digital platforms, despite constant, massive journalistic failures. I've reported on a ton of them here. The Times has propagandists on staff who openly lie. It has run op-eds from terrorists without telling you that they're terrorists. The Times told me in writing that they leave some stuff up that they know is false. So, why is the Times growing? The New York Times is cornering the market on a slice of America. That slice is shrinking, but the Times is getting a bigger share of it. If you're like, wait, huh? I don't blame you. The media doesn't tell you this stuff. But here's the deal. The best research that we have about what's going on in America politically comes from a firm called Blue Rose Research. I did an episode about this a while back. David Shore, the head of data there, told the New York Times this.
It's not just that New York Times readers are more liberal than the overall population. That's definitely true. It's that they're more liberal than they were 4 years ago, even though the country went the other way.
New York Times readers are going further and further to the left, while the country is going the other way. Maybe this will change. Things do swing. But the best information we have right now shows that the Times is growing its audience by getting people who are further left and driving them even further to the left. It's a cyclical system. It's like what Fox has done on the right, the New York Times has been doing on the left. People who are deeply committed to one side or another have a hard time hearing a sentence like that. They might be like, I love Fox, or I love the New York Times. How dare you compare? I'm literally talking about facts here. That is what these agencies have been doing. Despite lies and journalistic failures, they keep doubling down and growing their audiences in these pockets of America. So, when people, like the former Washington Post editor I played for you, when they say that the Post's entire problem is that it's been appeasing Trump, they are only looking at this shrinking slice of America. There is an audience of people who are sick of the failures and bias from big mainstream media. It doesn't occur to these folks that any of that is happening. They are so entrenched in their political worlds that they don't even realize this, or they're not willing to look at it. That maybe the Post is losing people because of its obsession with supporting big lies of the left, too. Boils down to this. They don't care about people who look for the whole truth without fear or favor. People like you. Coming up, how this problem played out in coverage of Bad Bunny's halftime show at the Super Bowl. Sometimes cultural moments reflect the media's penchant for tuning out what it doesn't want to see. Right now, the media is talking about fallout from Bad Bunny's halftime show at the Super Bowl. Big mainstream media are filled with reports extolling the performance as basically this flawless work of genius in every possible way. Bad Bunny has spoken out against ICE and faced criticism in advance from people who didn't like that he was going to sing in Spanish. So, in the media's simplistic victim-villain-hero triangle, he is the victim and everyone praising him gets to be a hero. Listeners have sent me examples of some over-the-top stuff from big media. One was from the Washington Post. I'm looking at it here. Oh man, the Post wrote this. In general, the show had the kind of wholesome, traditional family values that would have fit right in with some of the more sentimental commercials that appeared during the game. This article says it felt as if Sesame Street had worked up a reggaeton mix of people in your neighborhood, or Richard Scarry's Busy Town had made room for dancers ready to get busy. Oh, man. Someone please tell the Washington Post to read Bad Bunny's lyrics. It includes some of the most graphic, very not wholesome lines that you could hear in the Super Bowl. And if you enjoy the performance, great. That stuff is subjective, and artists always push envelopes that way. But the word wholesome has a meaning. I will put a link in the newsletter so you can see lyrics to some of these songs he performed. Some people are saying, well, sure, he has those words in his raps and he grabbed his crotch and acted out sex at certain moments, but he also might have skipped over certain words or purposely slurred certain words. And there was neighborhood energy in there and celebrations of culture, history, community, lots of things. This is what I'm saying. The media tunes out what it doesn't want to see so that you get a two-dimensional understanding. And it pretends that its own tunnel vision is presenting you the whole truth. Meanwhile, the people who say the Post has become so far to the right aren't saying a word about this kind of thing because it doesn't match their complaint. Then there's the New York Times' latest fiasco, and this is horrific. Yet another massacre in Nigeria by Islamist terrorist groups. I've reported here how the media refuses to tell you about genocides, especially targeting Christians in Africa. And I reported on how the New York Times had 0 headlines all of last year acknowledging the existence of Islamist terrorism. In this latest slaughter in Nigeria, reports say more than 160 people were killed. Even the AP, the Associated Press, couldn't run away from who was doing the killing this time. Their article says gunmen believed to be Islamic extremists killed scores of people in a western Nigerian state. But the New York Times did an entire story telling you that Muslim people are victims and never once telling you that Islamist terrorist groups are ravaging Nigeria. Here's one line from their disastrous anti-journalistic propaganda piece.
Most analysts say that the insecurity and chronic impunity puts both Christian and Muslim lives in danger.
They won't tell you who's doing this. Of course, other Muslim people are also killed. All Islamist terrorist groups kill Muslim people. That doesn't mean you ignore that these groups exist. At one point in the story, the Times does say that some analysts and residents said the gunmen behind this massacre were likely members of a faction of Boko Haram. But guess what they don't tell you? What Boko Haram is: an Islamist terrorist group. It's the same problem. Fixing this problem is why this show exists, providing a place that is about truth without fear or favor. As always, I want to know what you think. There are 2 great ways to be in touch. The best is through the newsletter, and the second is through a form at my website. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.